All right, everyone, welcome. It is Wednesday, October 25th. This is session 8 of the Intro to Coding Live JavaScript session. It is Wednesday, October 25th, and we're going to go ahead and get kicked off here with the last couple of slides in the slide deck that talk about some of the technologies that you'll learn at Code Platoon and what it takes to build a full stack web application. Answer any questions you have about that, and then we'll get into the challenges for the evening. So basically, when we talk about full stack development, the two big pieces of that are the back end and the front end, or what we refer to as the server side or the client side. And so the back end is going to be Python, and the front end is JavaScript. You won't actually be writing just vanilla Python or vanilla JavaScript. You're going to learn the frameworks Django and React. And what happens is, like, a Django server is going to run the back end of the application. It's going to be what interfaces with your database. At Code Platoon, you learn Postgres, which is a very popular flavor of SQL or SQL. And basically that's where you store all of the information. It gets if you're familiar at all with like databases, I mean, that's all the tables and fields and records, everything along those lines, how you store all the information in a relational database. Django is going to allow you to write Python code that is then translated into SQL, and it retrieves the data that you're looking for and then presents the data to the front end via an API. On the front end, so that's basically what the client sees, or why we call it client side, so what the user sees. So whenever you're using a website, again, that is actually a web application, so like Amazon, things along those lines, the part of the website that you're looking at on your monitor is the client side. And that is pretty much comprised of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And there's lots of flavors of that. React is really the big one out there. There's a couple other ones like Angular. And then there's like offshoots of React. And then same thing with HTML and CSS. Like there's CSS, there's SAS, there's SCSS. But those are all basically going to compile down back into CSS and JavaScript. And that's how you get basically like all of the colors. You make everything look really nice and presentable for your users. And you take all of that, like we had looked at JSON earlier in the class. So basically just like those nested array of objects, and you take all of that information and present it in a easily readable, user-friendly way. And in Code Platoon, kind of the path that you take is you learn like you'll get some additional practice with algorithm solving both in JavaScript and Python, and then that will move into object-oriented programming. Then you're going to learn about databases, and then you're going to do just a little bit with HTML and CSS, and then you will move into basically building out a Django server and having it interact with the database. And then you're going to learn some React. And then for your final projects, which are the last few weeks of class, like you will do a full stack web application that serves information from the back end to the front end by yourself. And then the final group project, you will basically, depending on class sizes, usually like groups of 3, 4, or 5, will get together and actually work as a team to build another full stack web application, and then present that during the graduation ceremony. And if you haven't looked at like the Code Platoon graduation ceremonies before, I would recommend checking it out. Let's see if we can find one here. So, Code Platoon graduation. Right, and so graduation. Like this is Tango Platoon, so I think this was the last one. This was like 5 months ago, so they're probably getting ready for the next one to post their Sierra. Probably keep going back through some of these. You can even probably go all the way back to Hotel Platoon when I graduated. And wow, they even got, well, that's part-time Alpha, Evening and Weekend Bravo. But you can keep going back all the way. Pretty much, I think they've recorded them since the beginning. And you can look at some of the different group projects that people put together. And there's actually some pretty cool things that have come out of Code Platoon as far as what 4 or 5 brand new software developers can come up with in 2 weeks of working together. All right, and so that's that, and then kind of how all of this glues together and what we just talked about, right, is you're going to learn that JavaScript, HTML, that's going to move into the React framework, object-oriented programming, and the same thing with Python and Django. Basically going into the Django ORM, Django framework. You're going to learn about third-party APIs. So how do you get information from outside servers that you don't necessarily control? So like reaching out to like a Google API, or I mean, there's tons of free APIs set up there that's set up to serve dummy data, or like I think the government has a bunch of servers, so like you can actually request statistics directly from government servers and get information about from the Federal Reserve or from NOAA, the big weather association, and then pull that into your application and serve that data. I mean, all of that comes together into a full stack web application. And that is it for the slides. Does anyone have any questions for me about kind of the learning path that you'll take through Code Platoon and any of the technologies that you'll work with?
I guess I have a question. This will show my ignorance. I'm guessing most people end up with more of either front end or back end job, or do people do both most of the time?
It really depends on the place that you end up working at. That comes down more to the structure of the organization. So some teams may be front end, some teams may be back end. Some teams like a smaller place, or like myself. I mean, I'm a contractor. I work for Eighth Light, and we don't have our own product, right? Like we don't write code for ourselves. We're consultants. And so like for me, I'm on a team with 4 other Eighth Light developers, and then we're working on a piece of software with 4 more developers from another company that then roll up into a suite of software that probably has like 25 developers on it. And when I worked on the main application, which is a very large piece of software, I worked on a dedicated front end team for about 1.5 years. And since I'm on the application that I'm writing right now, it's a smaller team, we're actually considered full stack. So everyone kind of has their own preferences, like, hey, I feel more comfortable working in the back end or the front end. But with my team, like it just depends on like what workflow I get assigned to, and I get some say in that. But like the last couple of months, I've been working strictly on a back end integration where I'm basically packaging up data that we collect and cleaning it and shipping it off to another part of the government. However, once this wraps up, it looks like I'm probably going to, as we get ready to bring the software live, I'm going to start working with our QA team, so our quality assurance team, and they're going to be looking for bugs in the software, and I'm going to be finding whatever bugs fixing whatever bugs they find. So I'll be all over the code base. Parts of it I've worked on before, parts of it that my colleagues have worked on, but it'll be encompassing both front end and back end work. And that's just the way my team's organized. So I wouldn't focus too much, especially in the beginning, on like I'm going to be a front end developer, back end developer, full stack developer. Because again, it's just like my take on what programming language is the best. It's the one that gets you paid. It's the same thing. Like if you have your heart set on being a front end developer, but someone comes along and says, "Hey, I'll pay you 95K a year, but you're going to be a back end developer," don't turn that offer down, right? Like take it, do it, get the experience under your belt. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but once you have the experience under your belt, then it becomes much easier to find it's much easier to find your second job than it is to find your first job in any occupation.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. But and I will say the hardest thing you'll do in Code Platoon is React. React framework is and like I work with people that love front end development and they love React. I work with people, I don't work in Python. My back end is in Ruby, which is very similar to Python. So instead of Django, I use a framework called Ruby on Rails. And I know people that absolutely love Rails and they don't want anything to do with the front end. And I know people that are happy to work in either. I'll take whatever comes my way. I don't have a preference one way or the other. I'd prefer to be independently wealthy and not have to do anything at all, but here I am. So if I have to do something, I'm glad I'm writing code at least. But yeah, this will be the last thing you learn in Code Platoon. Like everything builds up to this. Like you'll do the JavaScript and Python OOP, then the SQL and the HTML, and then the Django RM, then the Django framework, and then the React framework, and then full stack development. And anything you can do to expose yourself, like once you get accepted to Code Platoon, and again, this is advice I give everyone, to make it past the application, you have to do these challenges. This is a representation of a very good way to learn syntax and how the basic building blocks of a language work. This is a 0% representation of what real developers do on a day-to-day basis. And so once you get done with Code Platoon application or an application in any boot camp, I mean, by all means, keep doing challenges, but you can also branch out, right? Like again, back on Free Code Camp. So back-end development, API certifications, relational database certification, front-end development libraries, right? So Bootstrap is a CSS library that will help you out. Sass, React, like they have a whole section here in React. I would not worry too much about Redux. Redux is kind of going by the wayside because React has built something very similar to Redux directly into itself in the newer versions. But getting that React out of the way, there's other things you can do. Like I said, always exhaust your free resources. But like I said, Udemy is great. And like I said, never pay full price for anything. They're always running a sale for stuff for like $12.99 or $14.99. But I mean, like you can type in React over here and you can pick up lots of courses really cheap. And that goes for pretty much like any language you can think of. But like hammer this stuff if you're like again, Kim, like if you've already got all the points on the first 8 questions, like I would just push through those last 4 questions and submit. But like if you're looking for reinforcement on the concepts, the JavaScript algorithms and data structures and Free Code Camp is absolutely the way to go. But once you move past that, there's lots of stuff. There's also tons of stuff directly on YouTube for free. With videos and tutorials, it just depends on how you learn. There's lots of books out there. Like I said, I think I'd thrown out Humble Bundle before. I think they have like a web development one out there right now. I know they've got a data one, data science. Yeah, Programmer Mega Bundle. The web design and development, right? So So this one looks more general, so some Java, but some Ruby in there, quantum computing algorithms. You don't need that, uh, right? And fundamentals for self-taught programmers, probably not like a bad book to have. Oh, what else they got in here? A lot of Java stuff in here. There's a lot of books, but and I mean for 18 bucks, right? And same thing. I don't know that I'd buy that one, but like anything by No Starch Press is usually really good. So a lot of database stuff in here. This one, data science. So there's going to be a lot of Python in here. But yeah, so like Python flashcards, doing math with Python, data visualization with JavaScript, like those would all be like decent things to keep expanding your horizon. And then this one I think would be more towards the front end. Right, so TypeScript, that's also something that you could start to look into. Java and C# are strongly typed languages where you actually have to tell the computer what your variable is going to be. So for instance, like when we work in JavaScript, we can just say let x equal 50. In TypeScript, you actually have to say let x and then number equal 50, and then x can only ever be a number. You can change it to a different number, but it can only ever be a number. And this is the way that JavaScript is heading, especially at a professional level. Yeah, the rest of the stuff is like a lot of front end user experience stuff. But yeah, Udemy is a great resource. Humble Bundle is a great resource. Always do the free stuff first. Code Platoon, or well, not Code Platoon, but YouTube is a great resource. You do have to be a little picky on YouTube because make sure that the stuff is up to date, right? So like do this and say it's like JavaScript tutorial for beginners, right? So this one's like 5 years old, right? So here's one from Free Code Camp. So this one's probably going to be pretty decent. This one's only 6 months old, right? I mean, you can see, I don't know if I'm ready to recommend any courses from Bro Code, but Traversy Media is a really good one. And then the other thing too is that all right, so JavaScript programming full course, only 2 years old. And you can see, I mean, it's 7.5 hours long, but Zero to Hero is another good one. But yeah, I mean, there's just tons of resources out there for free to keep learning. And that is kind of the trick, is that you are like saturating your brain, and like it can get exhausting after a while and you need to take breaks, but you need to do like that spaced incremental repetition where you don't just keep doing this until your eyes bleed and like your brain runs out your ears. You do it until you're tired and you walk away from it for a day or 2 days or 3 days and take some time off, but then you come right back at it again. All right, so let me pull up the Replit here. I believe we were looking at I think it was called largest error. 1 second. All right. There we go. Three, so 4. Right, and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where we kind of left off on Monday night. Okay,
Yeah, that looks right. Sorry, I didn't realize my speaker was off.
yeah, no worries. So let's go ahead and we'll kind of go through it in class together here. We've got and for if I know we've got some people that have joined outside of that, so let me just cover the prep here real quick. So we need to write a function that takes in a list of incorrect numbers and a correct number and return the incorrect number furthest away from the correct number. Right, and so we've got two parameters coming in, an array of positive and negative integers that represent wrong numbers, an integer that represents the right number. An integer that is furthest away from our right number, that's what we're returning. And we've got some examples down here. And so I know that I'm going to need to loop through my array and check all of the numbers. I also know that I'm going to need a variable to keep track of the number that is currently furthest away from my right number. And I'm also going to my largest error size. And I also need to control for negative and positive numbers. And there's something in the math library that can help me, which is basically I need to figure out my absolute value. All right. And so with that, let's see here. And actually, you know what? Yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it at 7 o'clock. We'll work our way through this and then we'll take a break afterwards. So we need to keep track, or we need to be able to iterate through our wrong numbers array. So let's go ahead and we'll start off by making sure that we've got that we can see everything coming in. Right, so there's 0 and the arrays, and we're getting false because we're not returning anything. That looks good to me. And so next, I'm going to need to be able to loop through all of my wrong numbers, right? So I can say we'll do a for of loop this time, right? So we'll say for wrong num of wrong nums. And I believe it's a for of loop. We'll find out here real quick. You never remember the difference or the when to use for of and for. All right, so looks like that gave that to me. And so now I need to compare my wrong number to my right number. Right, and Kim, we had talked about this on Monday with like, hey, we keep a separate variable to track the error. And you said it didn't feel like that was necessary. So I want to try it without that and try it your way and see if we can get a correct solution. And then we'll go from there. And if we can, we'll see if we can break it somehow. And if we can't, then we're probably good. But I think I know how to break it without actually tracking the distance itself. All right, and so with this, I need to find, or I'll declare a variable here, and we'll say furthest away. All right, and we won't assign it a value yet, but we will get ready to assign it a value. And so, or actually, I guess I can say 0 because if it's if it's the same number, then it would be equal to 0, and every distance more than that would be greater than that. Right? So next, I need to compare wrong number, or the distance between the wrong number and my correct number. Right? So I can say this. Right? So now I get 3, 6, -10. I get 12, 15, and -1. All right. And if we then, let's see here. So turn furthest away. And then if wrong num minus correct num is greater than furthest away, furthest away equals wrong num. All right, and so with this, this will be a step in the right direction, but it shouldn't be the final thing that I've got going. All right, and let's go ahead and see what we look at now. So we've got a false and a true, right? So let's take a look here, and let's console.log furthest away. All right, so I get 6 and 6. And that is because I am looking at just this, like the raw numbers, without using the absolute value. And so this is where my absolute value comes in, which is math.abs. Right, math.abs static method returns the absolute value of a number. That, doing this, and let's go ahead and run this again. All right, so now I'm getting -10 and 6. So I'm passing both of these. And so let's see. And I could be, I'll be the first to admit that I could be wrong on this, right? So we do something like this. Right, I would expect that if my right number is 7, 2 is 5 away from that, and 11 is 4 away from that. All right, but I'm getting 11 here. And I think this is where the distance comes in. So, and I'm looking at it, and this one has always confused me. And that's why, like, with the distance, I believe, and because I'm not sure exactly what causes this to trip up. And maybe we can take a look at this over at Python Tutor. Oops. I'm guessing it doesn't let me use a for of loop in Python Tutor because wrong num is definitely defined. So let me do this here real quick. For let I equal 0, I less than wrong nums dot length. I plus plus, And then if wrong nums I minus correct num. And I think what, just from reading this, is what's tripping this up, right, is because we're always doing correct num. So wrong nums I, so 11 minus 7, right, should give us 4. And then we're taking the absolute value of that as 4. And then when it's 2, it is 2 minus 7, which gives us, that should give us -5, unless I'm overthinking this.
No, I agree. Absolute value of 5, but
Right, and so we get 5. And so for some reason, it's keying in on the 11 with the 4, even though it should be the 5, right? And so let's go ahead and run this here real quick. All right, that seems to be happy. All right, so we come in, furthest away is 0, and then got the loop, nums. So furthest away equals, and I think that's the reason why, is because I'm, if we're not keeping track of the actual distance, I'm assigning the number 2 to furthest away. And so then when it gets to 11, it is basically calculating the distance again. And then, which is 4, and it's saying that's greater than 2. And that's why we have to track the distance and the number separately. Does that make sense now?
so it's not calculating 7 minus 2 as absolute value of 5. Is that just not happening?
It is right here. Right, but then we're then assigning the value of 2 to furthest away.
Instead of 5.
Right. Because we need to return, which I've got a typo there, or no, I don't. We need to return that. And so that's why we have to keep the separate variable for comparison's sake, the biggest distance, and then the number that distance came from, because otherwise we're not tracking the number that we need to return.
Okay.
Right, and so that's why we would say, like, let largest error equal 0, and then we would say, instead of, you know, let me convert this to a I equals 0. Well, I is less than wrong nums dot length plus plus. Right, and then we could say, if math ABS wrong num minus correct num is greater than largest error, then we can say furthest away, sorry, this is wrong nums I, and then furthest away becomes wrong nums I, and then largest error, it becomes this. Right, and then now we're tracking that, because now we've got furthest away becomes 2, and then largest error is now 5, and so we'll loop through, and this is only going to be 1, and now when we loop through again, we're going to say basically 11 minus 7, the absolute value of that is 4, right? And is that bigger than 5? And it'll say no, so now we should still continue to get that 2 there. So, and these ones are still right, but now we've got this one as well. And so this would be the correct answer to that one, because we have to track that the distance and largest error as well. And like I said, it's almost kind of a bad example on the first one, because with 0, it always, like, it is the same, right? Like these two numbers will always be equal. But there's definitely going to be situations where that's not the case.
Okay. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm having too many variables and it's getting too messy, but when you need them, right? It doesn't make it messy code.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And like the thing I would say is on your first pass, write as many variables as you need to get it to make it to pass. And then you can always go back and look at your code. And if you're not using a variable anymore, obviously that's a candidate for deleting it. But then you can start to look to see if there's any places to clean up. Or honestly, sometimes when I clean up code, I break, like, if I had like a lot of stuff written out in here, right? Like I've got this big long thing twice, like this could be a candidate for breaking out a variable as well. Twice I wouldn't worry about it. But if I was using this 3 or 4 times, I would like say like let absolute distance, right, equal right. And so having more variables isn't necessarily a bad thing, because like honestly at this point my code's a little bit easier to read, right? Like I know what absolute distance is doing, and now I just absolute distance instead of having calling the math absolute twice.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Well, and thank you for making me think about this. Like it's, again, like I had to struggle my brain through this one as well, because I've definitely in previous classes solved it the other way and just moved on and never really questioned that. All right, so that is the largest error. And so it is 7:15. Let's go ahead and take like a quick 5-6 minute break here at 7:17. I'll kick class back off at 7:22. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next one. We'll go ahead and do the repeated characters. Yeah, let's go ahead and work through the prep work on that. This is a fun one. All right, so we're going to write a method that takes in an array of characters and a similar length array of integers. Return a string consisting of every character repeated the number of times as indicated in the integer array, with each character corresponding to the number in the same position. All right, so we're going to get 2 params, an array of characters, and a corresponding array of integers. And we're going to have one return, which is a string of the characters repeated the correct amount of time. All right, so we'll say C below. And so this is another challenge where we're going to need multiple loops. So need to iterate through my arrays. And then, sorry, let's write this a little better. I need an outside loop to iterate through my arrays. I need an inside loop that will need the appropriate number of characters based on the corresponding integer. All right. Need variable to hold my string. All right. Does anyone want to lead the class through this one with me assisting?
I will try if no one else wants to.
Sure. Let me stop my share here real quick. And actually, sorry, before I do that, let me copy and paste this into the chat. And also into the intro to coding, which is hiding from me at this very second. Sorry, 1 second here. There it is. There. All right, so let me stop my share. And I'll also pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the repeated characters challenge. We did get a solution with the group, so we're going to go ahead and go over that in class now, and then we will move to the next challenge. All right, so first things first, as always, I'm going to take a look and make sure that I am getting what I expect for my two parameters. So we'll go ahead and run that. Excuse me. All right, so there's my char array, there's my num array, there's my char array, there's my num array. So that means I can see both of them. So first step here is I'm going to make, because I know that I'm going to need two loops. I'm going to need a loop that goes through each index position in my two arrays in the outer loop. Then my inner loop, I'm going to need to basically take the num array or the element of the num array that I'm currently on, and then repeat the element in the corresponding index in the char array. All right, so let's get that outside loop working first. So we'll go ahead and we'll say for let I equal 0, I less than char array dot length. And it doesn't matter if I pick char array or num array here, because the problem specifically states that the similar length array. So we know they'll always both be the same length. All right, and we'll say I plus plus. And let's go ahead and console.log char array I and num array I. And let's make sure that we're spitting out what we expect. All right, that looks good to me as well. And so now that I'm here, I need to write my inside loop, and I need to be able to access, I need to write my inside loop, and I'm going to use that to duplicate the elements in my char array. So we'll say for, and we're just going to say let j equal 0. So whenever we do nested loops, we can always just bump the incrementer one letter forward. If I was doing a triple loop, which would, if you ever have to write a problem that has a triple loop, there's probably a better way to solve it. Like it'd be k and m and so on. And so we'll say while j is less than num array I, right? So the first time through, we want to count one time. The second time through, we want to count two times. The third time through, we want to count three times. And so we're going to keep counting well, it's less than each specific element in my number array. All right. Then we'll say J++. And let's go ahead and console.log char array I, right? So because as I each loop through on my outer loop, right, I'm going to grab A and 1, right? And so this is going to become A. This is I'm going to repeat it one time. The second time I loop through my outer loop, right, this is going to be B, and this is going to become 2, and that way I'm going to repeat B twice and 3 times for C. All right. So there's my A, B, B, C, 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 and then the same thing for hello, 1, 1, 2, 1. So that looks good to me. So I'm just console.logging this stuff out, and I do need to save it to a string. So let's go ahead and declare my string up here outside of the loops. And we'll just call it result string. And we'll just make it an empty string. And now instead of console.logging, I can actually take this and we'll say result string plus equals char array I. And then down here, we'll console.log result string. And let's see what we get. All right, so I get A, B, B, C, 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 and then hello. Still returning false because I'm not returning anything. So let's pull that out of the console.log. And we'll run it one more time, and there's my true. All right. So any questions on any of the steps that I took to solve this one? Okay, so let's go ahead and stop that one, and let's take a look at the next challenge. All right, so we did repeated characters. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and look at prime numbers, I believe. Oops. Okay, so prime number is a positive integer with no divisor besides itself and 1. It cannot be divided without a remainder by any number besides itself and 1. Write a function to check whether a given positive integer greater than 1 is prime or not. All right, so we're going to get one input, which is an integer. And we're going to return is prime or not. So we're going to return a Boolean. All right, and it looks like down here, so we'll say C below, and we'll say for the pseudocode, right off the bat, I see that I've got some string representations of number here, so I know I'll need to basically to convert input to integer. Right, so that'll, when I do parseInt, that's going to either force my string representation of the numbers to an integer, or it is going to tell me not a number. All right, and so All right, so let me go ahead. Grab this. So here. So here. Of course, it's too big. This. This. All right. All right, everyone, welcome back from the prime numbers challenge. We got a solution for it, so we're going to go ahead and go over it in class. As I said with this one, I'm not there. There is a mathematical formula for determining prime numbers. We can go ahead and look that up. But the first pass through, we're gonna brute force it. We're gonna use a loop to figure out if we've got a prime number or not. All right, and so let's go ahead and take a look here. So we'll say console.log num. Right, so 1 true, 2, oh, because I've got this in there, that's why it's throwing that. But the nums 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10. All right, that looks pretty good to me. And so now I know that I'm going to need a loop. So because I'm going to have to compare each of my numbers that I'm given in my function call to all the values between 1 and that number exclusive of 1 and that number. So let's go ahead and say for let I equal, and we get in the habit of just writing like I equals 0, but in this case, I know that I don't want to divide it by 0 and I don't want to divide it by 1. So I'm actually going to start counting at 2 on this. And then I'm going to keep counting as long as I is less than num. I don't want it to be less than or equal to num, because if it's equal to num, then I'm dividing the number by itself, which number, pretty much every number is divisible by itself. And we're going to increment by 1 here. And so let's go ahead and console.log. And we'll do num. We're going to use the remainder operator or the modulus by I. And let's go ahead and take a look at that and see what that looks like. All right, so I got 1, 1, 2, 1, 0, 0. Right, so on my 10, there, as I count through each of the numbers, right, so the first thing I divide it by is 2, I get no remainder, which means that 10 is evenly divisible by 2. And then it's also evenly divisible by 5, right? 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that tells me that this is not a prime number. And so what I'm looking for is something that looks like this, right? So I'm checking to see if it's evenly divisible by a number, right? And that's what this is telling me. Then I want it to take an action. So let's go ahead and just run this again here real quick. All right, so I get, for the first one is false, all false, and then for the the 10, right, like there's my 2, and again there's my 5, and then so that's where we're at with that. And so let's go ahead and pull this out of the console.log, and we can say if num remainder I is equal to 0, then that it is false that this is a prime number, right? And if I'm able to loop through everything and I never hit this false statement, so I'll get out of my if statement, I'll get out of my loop, and I'll come down here to the last thing that my function will do, and it'll return true. All right, and so let's go ahead and run this again. All right, so I've got true for these last 4, but I got false for the first one, and I'm counting at 2. And I had to look this up just to double check, but I'll ask Google again, is 1 a prime number? And before I even click on the results, it's telling me no. Right, so I know that if someone gives me 1 in here, that we'll go ahead and say if num is triple equal to 1, we can return false, right? Because it is not a prime number. Now, with this, we have some implicit conversion to integers. When we do a mathematical operation, so when num is a string representation, and we put it through a mathematical operation, JavaScript is nice enough to convert it to an integer for us. However, up here, I am not doing that. So if I just run this again, I'll still get false. And that is because I'm asking if the string representation of the number 1 is strictly equal to number 1. And that is actually false. So we never come in here and return false. And we never go into the loop, and we just come down here to true and say that it is true, that it is a prime number. And that is not correct. So here I will do just a %, of num1 or of num. All right, and now I'm returning true for everything. So any questions on any of the steps that I took to solve on this one? Okay. So let's go ahead and it is 8:07. Let's go ahead and take another 5-minute break. I'm going to pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. So we've kind of reached the end of the arrays and loops section here. And where it looks like, well, there is the what's my GPA arrays and loops. It's not that great of a challenge. We are going to move into working with some objects, and then we should be able to get through card trip fairly quickly. And then maybe we'll be able to fit in a number of characters, and that's the objects and loops. But if we just go through card trip, then I mean, we've done quite a few challenges for the evening already. But let's go ahead and pull this one up. We're going to fork it. All right, let's grab the README. Grab this whole thing here. All right. So with this one, we're going to write a function that takes in a car object, and in the form of people, miles, spare tires used will be our key value pairs, and a number of miles driven as an integer. We're going to update the car object to include the new amount of miles on the odometer. Additionally, the road trip is very rocky, so you'll need to use additional spare tires every 1,000 miles. Update the car object to reflect this as well. All right, so I'm actually, let me just do this here real quick. So we'll say let car equal, and we'll pull this object out of here so this isn't quite so messy, and we'll have car, and actually, sorry, we'll call this car object, and this becomes car object, and then inside the function we'll just call it car. All right, so we've got 2 parameters. So the first one is a object that contains 3 key value pairs, right? People, miles, spares used, right? And then also an int that represents total miles traveled. And we're going to return one thing, which is an updated object that includes the updated odometer and the updated number of spares used. All right, so example, say see below. All right, so with this one, I don't need to iterate anything like that. I just need to figure out how to access the miles and spare tires used inside of my object. I will need to add the miles traveled to miles. We'll also need miles traveled to calculate how many spare tires I've used. Once I know the number of spares used, I will need to update that value as well. All right, so this one, no iteration, anything like that. We just need to calculate a couple of things and modify some key value pairs here. So let me go ahead and grab this. Maybe grab this, come on. All right, and over here. Got that, and then let me grab this. And in the chat. And then let me grab this. And throw it in the chat. All right, pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the car trip challenge. We got another solution. So let's go ahead and go through it in class. Okay, so with this one, it's the first time working with objects here in a little bit, so we're just kind of ramping up again. But I need to do two different things here, right? We've got people, that's kind of a like a misdirection there. We don't need to do anything with this, like we're not changing anything here. But I do need to update the miles or the mileage with the amount of miles traveled, excuse me. Excuse me, sorry about that. Didn't quite make it to the mute button in time. And then also, we're going to need to calculate how many spare tires were used. So let's update the odometer first. And so what we're going to do here is we'll say to access a key inside of an object. And so even though it's defined as car object up here, right, and there's my object, down in my function call, I am passing it in. So when I reference it inside my function, I'm just going to call it car. We're going to pretend that this doesn't exist. And so I can say car, and we'll say miles. And let's just go ahead and console.log this to make sure I'm getting the right thing. All right, 1500, that's the value for my miles. And so all I need to do is do plus equals miles, which is what we're passing in. All right, and there's 7,000. So that looks good to me. And then the next thing we're going to need to do is figure out how to calculate the right amount of spare tires that we use. So we'll start a new console.log here. And we know that we've got miles getting passed in. Right, there is my 5,500. And I know that every 1,000 miles, I'm going to need a new tire. And we're not worrying about any fractional new tires. So I can take this and divide it by 1,000. And I get my 5.5. And to do this, all I need to do is there's a couple of different ways to do it. So I could do math.floor, which is basically we'll always push the number down to the floor. I can also do parse in here, which will then always just chop it off and round it to the nearest whole integer. So it won't ever round up. So even if that was 5.99 and I do parse in, it's going to just chop it off and give me the 5. So that'll work for these purposes. And so now I've got that, and I need to update the amount of spare tires used. So I can pop this outside of the console.log and I'll say car. And we'll say spare tires used. And we'll just say plus equal here as well. We could probably get away with just doing equals. That would work as well for one time. But if we were to continue to call this multiple times so that it impacts it multiple times over the length of multiple trips, then we'd want to keep incrementing it as well, additive. So let's go ahead and do this, and then we'll say console.log car. Oops, I did something bad here. Unexpected token. I've got one too many friends from my console.log. And there we go. So we've got people. Oops. So I've got spare tires used 0 and then spare tires used. Man, so I've got a typo over here. Let's see this then. All right, and there's my spare tires used 5, and I'm looking pretty good there. And then to get rid of that undefined, I'll take it out of the console and I'll just return it. It'll get caught in this console log down here. And no more undefined. So there's the answer to this one. All right, so we've got 836 here. Let's see. The next one would be current grade. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. Oops. Export it. Well, all right, so with this one, it's going to be very similar to the previous one. All right, so once again here, we're going to be getting 2 params. First one is an object with a grade and GPA key value pair, as well as a improvement, which will change the GPA. All right, we're going to return an updated object with the new grade and GPA. All right, so we'll say C below. Okay, so there's 2 things that I'm changing here, right? So write a method that takes in a student object with attributes GPA as a number and grade level as a number as well as an integer representing the change in their GPA. This method should update the student's GPA to include the change and increase their grade level by 1 year, and it should return the updated student object. All right, so I need to add +1 to the grade key and value, and I need to add the positive or negative number to the GPA. Return the updated object. All right, so like I said, this one's very similar to the one that was right before it, but it's good practice. And let's drop that in there. Yeah, there. We go ahead and pause the recording. All right, everyone, well, welcome back from the current grade challenge. So we got a solution in the group. So let's go ahead and go over it in class. As I said, this one's very similar to the one that we did just previous to it, the car trip. We basically need to get into our student object and modify some of the key value pairs in here. All right, so the first one, I know that I need to add +1 to the grade value for everyone, regardless of what happens. So let's go ahead and do console.log, and we'll make sure that we can access the right thing here. So we're going to look at student grade. Let's see what we get. 10 and 6, that looks good to me. And we can do ++ here. Oops, student grade. It's probably because it's in the console.log. Let's do this. Pull it out of here. That. There we go, and there's the 11 and 7. So I've incremented the grade by 1 on each of those. And next thing I need to do is get into the GPA. Right, 2.5 and 4, that looks good to me. And then I'm going to do plus equals the improvement, even though we call it improvement. One of them definitely is not an improvement. Let's go ahead and pull this out as well. That there, and we'll go ahead and run. All right, we get 2.8 and 3.4. Those seem to match up. So that's all I needed to do. And then I can return student out of here. And there's my grade 11, 2.8, grade 7, 3.4, 11, 2.8, 7, 3.4. All right, cool. Well, so it is 8:46 going on 8:47 here. So I don't think we have a time for the next one, because that one we're going to be looping with an object, and it's actually a little bit more, so the number of characters is a little bit more challenging. So we'll stop here. I'm going to pause the recording